People mistakenly think that's something fairly new. You don't see a lot of mention of holy humor until around the 1970s. But that's because up until then it was called something else. It was called Reiches Paschalis. And it actually started back in the second century, not that long after our very first Easter. And the reason for it is, in case you've forgotten, is that, we build up through Lent and we celebrate and we get all excited, and then we have Easter morning and it's a huge celebration, and then after that we just kind of go back into ordinary time, the 5 Sundays of Easter. And the early church fathers and the people said, this is such a great celebration, we should keep it going. So that whole week, not just the next day, but on Sunday, but the whole week, they would have picnics and they would have games and they would do all kinds of fun stuff around the church and in the parks. And yeah, they would even play practical jokes on each other, including the pastor. Now you notice I waited to tell you that until it's all over today, right? But they did. Yeah, that's true. So, it is Righteous Paschalis, and it is a celebration, a continuation of the joy of Easter. When it kind of fell off a little bit, when it was revived back in the 70s, you never knew what was going to happen. And you guys know from some of the stuff I've done in the past that you just never know what's going to happen on Holy Humor Sunday. And today, I'll be honest with you, just like Sandy got caught off guard a little bit because I kind of forgot about the order stuff because of everything that was going on. So I didn't have as much time to really play with things. But as I was writing, surprisingly, all the stories I gathered up had something to do with pastors. Uh-oh. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. I don't know, you may have heard them before, you may not, but they're just going to have a little fun for a while, and then we're going to get a little bit serious towards the end. So the first one, a mom and her little daughter were visiting a neighboring town. Never been there before, so they decided on Sunday morning to go to the church. Then it was a little rural church. Well, they had a brand new pastor. Now, before the pastor arrived, the trustees and the board got together and said, we ought to get a headset microphone for the pastor. But unlike our board and trustees, they were a little frugal. So they got him a headset microphone, but they didn't get a wireless one like we use. They got a cabled one. So there's a thing that goes from his ear to his belt, and then this big long cable. Well, like I said, it was a brand new pastor, and what they didn't know is he was a very animated pastor. So when he would preach over here to you guys, and then he'd turn and preach to you guys, and then he'd turn and preach to the choir, and then he'd turn and preach to the liturgists, and he'd take a step and trip because the cable was wrapped around him. And he didn't want to interrupt the message, so as he was walking back and forth and back, and he'd trip over it and he'd kick it off, and he was going around, and he would say, Jesus Christ died for our salvation. Let go of me. And he kept going with the message. Well, Mom noticed that the little girl was getting a little nervous. And she looked down, she said, sweetheart, are you okay? And she looked up at Mom and said, Mommy, he looks dangerous. If he gets loose, will he hurt us? There was a Episcopal, I can't even say that, Episcopal priest whose wife had a baby. Now, most of you know, unfortunately from experience probably, that when we go to a hospital, we wear our dog collar, our clerical collar. So that helps identify us and what we're doing. So the priest went to visit his wife in the hospital after she had a baby, and, well, he had to make rounds anyhow. So his wife's roommate was out for a walk, and she saw the priest going from door to door and room to room talking to people. And then when she got back to the room, she sat down, and pretty soon the priest came in and gave his wife a great big hug, gave her a great big kiss. They talked for a while and got up, and as he was leaving, he gave her another big hug and another big kiss. After he left, the roommate looked at her and said, boy, your priest is a lot more friendly than mine is. The pastor went to the farmhouse for dinner. Been a pastor for a long time. Always loved to go there because they grew their own cattle, and Mom was a really, really good cook. So they sat down to eat, and boy, he kept saying how great the meat was. Pretty soon the 5-year-old said, I'm surprised you like it. In fact, I'm surprised I like it. The pastor said, why is that? And he said, because it's skunk. He looked at the boy, and Mom and Dad told him to shush. And said, no, no, it's skunk. I really do like it, Mom. I was surprised I liked it. Then the pastor just kind of smiled and continued to eat. And finally he looked over and said, why is it you think this is skunk? Little boy said, because I heard Mom and Dad talking this morning. They said they're going to have the old skunk for dinner tonight. Hard crowd.
Oh, dear.
Tough crowd. When I was young, I got to thinking about this. It's been a good 40 years now, maybe more. And I hate to think of that, but I was in Boston with my mom and dad. Yeah, right. But I was young. I was in Boston with Mom and Dad, and Dad used to go to conventions all over. I don't know if you ever been to Boston, but in the old part of town, what they call streets, we would call alleys. They're extremely narrow, and they're cobblestone. And if you're very, very lucky, you might be able to pass two cars through without quite scraping the buildings on each side. They're very, very narrow streets. And the cab drivers are crazy. I don't know if you ever took a cab there, but they zing up and down those streets and in around those corners. They're sharp corners. They're not the nice big curves like we have. They're pointed. So they go in and out of these little streets, and it just drives you nuts. Which is why I've always liked this particular story. There's a fairly pompous pastor standing in line to get into heaven. He noticed the guy in front of him was a little shabby looking. He thought to himself, well, they'll let anybody in here, won't they? So when he got up to St. Peter, the fairly shabby looking guy was standing there, and Peter looked in his book and said, so, you're a Boston cab driver for your whole life. The man said, yes, sir, I was. So St. Peter had him a beautiful silk robe and a golden staff, pointed to his huge mansion up on the hill and said, that place is yours right there. Well, the cabbie smiled and off he went. Well, the pompous pastor thought, well, if a lowly cabbie like that got that kind of reward, you can't imagine what I'm going to get after serving the Lord all my life and all these years. So he got up there, and Peter looked in his book and says, oh, you're a preacher your whole life. Says, yes, sir, I was. I served the Lord my whole life. Peter handed him this little linen robe and a wooden staff and pointed to a little cottage off to the side, said, that's yours over there. Well, the pastor was incensed. So just a minute. I spent my whole life serving God, serving the church, serving the people, preaching every Sunday. And I get this, and the cabbie, all he did is drive a cab, and he gets silk robes and a golden staff and a mansion. And Peter said, sir, up here, we reward on results. When you preach, people slept, but when that cab driver drove, people prayed. I don't know if any of you ever done healthcare, but this is kind of dedicated to you. And I would nod to my wife. Sister Mary Rose, beautiful little nun, used to take care of people, did home health care. Well, one morning she was on her way to a client's house, and she ran out of gas right in front of the United Methodist Church. Well, she happened to look up the road, and there was a gas station a few blocks up, so she got up and ran up there to see if she could get some gas. Well, the attendant was very apologetic, said, ma'am, I'm so sorry, but the only spare gas can I have is gone. You're welcome to wait around for it to come back, but I have no idea how long it's going to be. Well, Sister Rose was very resourceful, so she got back in her car and started digging around, see if she could find anything to carry gas in. The only thing she could find was a metal bedpan. So she headed up to the gas station and started filling up with gas. In the meantime, the United Methodist pastor and one of his elders came out, started to sit on the stoop, had a cup of coffee. Well, here comes Sister Mary Rose, and she opened her gas cap, started to dump the gas in out of her bedpan. The elder looked over to the pastor and said, Pastor, you know I love you and I love this church, but if that car starts, I'm going to become a Catholic. Sorry. Anyhow, one question I seem to get from a lot of people for some unknown reason is, how'd you turn out the way you are? What made you the person you are? Because you're a little odd, a little weird. And I want to answer that with one last little story about a pastor, and this pastor is me. And I'm going to give you one little incident. This is absolutely 100% real. I don't know if my daughter's even heard this before, but this is absolutely true. It's absolutely real. Happened to me. And this is the kind of youth and childhood I had that made me the kind of person I am. It was a beautiful fall Saturday morning. Now, my lovely wife and I met in band. There was a football game night before, so we were out quite late, and I was sleeping in. At least I planned on it. Quite early in the morning, I hear my dad hollering up the stairs, "Darryl, come on. We got to go work in the orchard." My dad was a hobby farmer. He raised everything you can imagine at one point or another. Now he had this little bitty orchard that he was tinkering with every single weekend, which meant, of course, that I had to work too. So I got up and I put on my normal working on the farm clothes. This is kind of important. Had a tore up old pair of jeans, a pair of work boots, a button up shirt that I had ripped the sleeves off of, and a baseball cap. So I went downstairs and heard the tractor running behind the house. I looked around the corner and there was my dad. Kind of surprised me. He was in a hazmat suit. I don't know if you ever seen him, but it was a whole thing. Hood, jacket, pants, boots, gloves, a metal face shield covered his whole face, big old respirator filters on the front. And I looked at him and said, "Hey, should I change my clothes?" And he said, "No, you'll be on the tractor. Don't worry about it." I said, "How dangerous is this stuff?" My dad had a license to use the really heavy duty sprays that you can't use anymore today, but back in the 70s you could. And he said, "Well, it's really dangerous, but don't worry about it. I'll be the one with the spray." So, okay. So we went around and I saw this rig that Dad had built. Tractor, a wagon, huge spray tank. And on the back of the spray tank, he had built this little bitty platform. And he had a high pressure hose running back to that platform with a spray pistol, spray gun attached to it. So here's the plan. I'm going to drive a tractor. He's going to stand on the back of the trailer and spray the trees. My dad is a very intelligent person. He was a mechanical engineer, but he didn't think this one through. So the tractors we had were old. We had a 36 case that we used around the farm. Okay, these were old, and the clutch should have been replaced about 50 years earlier. So here's what he says, exact words. "We got to have a lot of pressure so I can reach all the trees. So 100% throttle, keep it in second gear, start out easy, and we'll get these trees sprayed." I said, "Well, why don't you let me get a rolling start, and then I'll throttle up." "Nope, only got enough spray for the exact number of trees we got." I didn't have time to ask him why, what the difference was, because there wouldn't be a difference as far as I could tell, but I said, okay. So I got on tractor, throttled it all the way up, started to let the clutch out. I felt the clutch start to grab. This clutch had two stages, on or off. That was it. So I felt the clutch. I let it out just a tiny bit more. The tractor jumped ahead about 2 feet. Then I heard a lot of yelling from behind the tractor. Remember, he's standing on a platform about the size of this rug here. Well, he was. I go back there. The hoses are flying all over the place. He's laying on the ground, rolling around, all wrapped up in the hoses, cussing up a storm. But luckily, I couldn't hear him because he had this big face thing on. So I knew what he was saying, but I didn't really hear him very clearly. So I picked him up and listened to him tell me what he thought of me, put him back on the little platform, went back, and I said, "Why don't you let me power it up?" "No, we need full power right from the start." So I tried it again, same result. Well, once I got him all cleaned up, all the grass out of his mask and everything else, got him back on the sprayer, I said, "Look, it doesn't matter where you start. There's the same number of trees. Let me get it going, start spraying. Remember where you sprayed. I'll come back down this aisle and we'll finish." He stood there and looked at me and said, "Oh, yeah, okay." All right, so I get the tractor. This is all true. Remember, this is 100% really happened. I get the tractor going, get going a little ways down, bring the throttle all the way up to 100%. Hear him start to spray. And remember, there's a lot of pressure, like 80 to 100 pounds of pressure in these hoses. All of a sudden, something smacked me across the back, really hard. Felt like somebody hit me with a baseball bat. Now, we had this little dent in the fender of the tractor where I always rested my foot, which was right above the clutch. so I could get to the clutch fast if I had to. Well, when it hit me in the back, I moved forward. My foot slipped off that thing, hit the clutch, which stopped the tractor. Thunk goes dead against the back of the spray tank, and bounces back onto the ground. So in the meantime, I got my own problems. I can't figure out what just happened. So I put the tractor in neutral. I jump off the tractor, and my boots go squish. And I thought, how did the inside of lace-up work boots get wet? And I realized I am soaked from head to toe, dripping wet, drenched. I look, and sure enough, one of the high-pressure hoses came unattached. So I'm covered with this spray that Dad said not to worry about because it'll be back by him. So I go in the back, and here's my dad, remember, mechanical engineer, brilliant guy, looking at the end of the spray gun, trying to figure out why it's not spraying and wiping grass out and pulling the trigger. Okay. So I look at that and start laughing, and then I look at him, and he looks at me. Again, I'm drenched. Every inch of my body under my clothes is soaked with this high-powered spray stuff. He looked at me just as straight as could be and said, well, you probably ought to take a shower. You'll probably be okay. That, my friends, was just one of hundreds of incidents like that that made me who I am today. So if you wonder why things don't really rattle me that much, that's one of the reasons. And why I find humor in everything, that's another reason. That's just a little bit of my background. But I want to tell you, righteous pastorless, when you translate it, it means the Easter joke. The joke was on the devil because the devil thought he won. When Jesus was laid in that tomb, the devil thought he won. He was sure he had defeated God and God's plan for all of us. But he was wrong. The joke was on him. Because on that Easter morning, Jesus walked out of the tomb. And that's why we have a chance to laugh, to celebrate, to be joyful, to tell jokes, and to enjoy life because Jesus won that life for us with his blood. So even though it's the first Sunday after Easter, remember there's a reason to celebrate every Sunday, every day, because the joke was on the devil. He didn't defeat God. God defeated death for you and me. So smile, find humor in things, and remember that the ultimate victory was won for you by the blood of Jesus Christ. Amen?